Good evening and welcome. I am Bill Medlin, Chancellor of Viterbo University. As the first director of the D.B. Reinhart Institute for Ethics and Leadership, it is my privilege to welcome you to the university and to tonight's special presentation. Elie Wiesel's presence is certainly a milestone in the 9-year history of the Institute. But there's also another milestone. I believe without a doubt that those of you who are here in the main theater, as well as those of you who are in the lobby, in the black box theater, in the recital hall, as a group, as a composite, comprise the largest audience ever to be at a presentation here in the Fine Arts Theater in its 35-year history. Obviously, the message is compelling, and it is a privilege for us to be able to present Dr. Wiesel tonight. I do want to extend a few notes of appreciation. First of all, to Rick Kite for his vision, for his superb leadership over these past 7 years as director of the Institute. To Darrell Klott, whose passion for the Holocaust has culminated in bringing Dr. Elie Wiesel to Viterbo. I also want to thank Gary Klein and Pat Kerrigan. I want to thank Michael Ranch and the entire Fine Arts staff for their efforts in accommodating every one of our single needs. And also to many of you who will remain anonymous, I thank you for your kindnesses and your gratitude in ensuring that this special evening does occur. And finally, to Marge Reinhart and the Reinhart family. Marge, it was you who from the very outset, and you're one of the few, who understood this vision, this dream, to make Viterbo University the center of ethical studies in the tri-state area. You believed that we needed both a place and a forum in which to conduct ethical questioning. Thanks to you and others, we now have the D.B. and Marge Reinhart Center for Ethics, Science, and Technology. We also have the D.B. Reinhart Institute for Ethics and Leadership. And through that institute, we are providing annually courses across the curriculum in ethics. We're providing workshops and also special presentations such as tonight. So again, I want to welcome all of you here gathered. We thank you for being here and sharing this special evening with us. And a very special welcome to our renowned presenter, Elie Wiesel. Thank you.
Avinu Shabashamayim, Heavenly Father, uphold and bless this our country, the United States of America. Bless our community and our gracious host, Viterbo University. Bless her students, her faculty, her administrators, her benefactors and friends, and all who have come to share this evening of fellowship with Elie Wiesel. In the Ethics of the Fathers, Chapter 1, Mishnah 2, we have this teaching from a sage who lived over 2,000 years ago, named Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous. He used to say, Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed, the world stands on three things: al ha-Torah, on guidance, ve'al ha'avodah, and on service, ve'al gimilut chasadim, and on acts of loving kindness. For the guidance and instruction, Elie Wiesel has devoted his entire life to sharing. We thank you, God, and especially for this opportunity to listen closely. May Elie's personal example of service to humanity, his acts of loving kindness to all people, regardless of race, color, or belief, inspire us, energize us, and challenge us to reach beyond ourselves so that we who are created in your image may also be called your servants. May it be your will, dear God, that all of us leave here tonight better people than we came in, more compassionate, more loving, better informed, and transformed into instruments of loving kindness and pursuers of peace and justice for all. The ancient rabbis composed blessings for everything, so that we are mindful of the gifts, great and small, bestowed by the Creator of us all. And so we ask, dear God, that you accept our gratitude for the gift of this evening with Elie Wiesel. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Praised are you, Lord our God, ruler of the cosmos, who has given us life and kept us in health and has allowed us to reach this moment. And let us say, Amen.
For those of you with written questions, please pass them to the end of the row so the ushers can collect them for use during the question-answer session. Good evening. I am Darrell Klott, a Holocaust educator, and my hero is Elie Wiesel. The first time I had the occasion to meet him was October 2002, when I took a group of students to hear him speak in Rochester, Minnesota. I came home and told my husband that up until that time, the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me was when I was at an Elvis concert 11 months before he died, and I broke through the police barricade to get to the front row where Elvis sang, "I Can't Help Falling in Love with You," into my eyes. Meeting and hugging Elie topped that, and I have never been quite the same. On March 22nd, I received the phone call that he had accepted my invitation to come to speak to us tonight. One of the first things I did was to call Sister Mary Ann Gershwin, chair of the Viterbo Board of Trustees, to please request that the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, who have been praying round the clock for 127 years, would pray that Professor Wiesel would remain in good health so he could come to us tonight. Their prayers worked. Elie Wiesel is one of our nation's most respected citizens. He has been given 116 honorary degrees from institutions of higher learning. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter appointed him chairman of the President's Commission on the Holocaust. He was the founding chairman of the council that formed a place I dearly love, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., which has received more than 24 million visitors since its inauguration in 1993. His 131 awards include the U.S. Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor Congress can bestow on a civilian, awarded him in 1985 by President Ronald Reagan. He was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1992 by President George Bush. In 1986, he was awarded what many consider the most prestigious award in the world, the Nobel Peace Prize. 56 books have been written about him, and he has written 47 books, including his very first, Night, his masterpiece, a candid, horrific, and deeply saddening autobiographical account of surviving the Holocaust as a teenager. Night has been translated into 30 languages and is taught in high schools and universities across our country and the world. Recently, it was Oprah's Book Club choice and the subject of an essay contest, which over 50,000 high school students entered nationwide, telling why the book, which was published in 1958, is still relevant today. In May, I viewed Oprah's show and watched Elie and Oprah walk the grounds of Auschwitz, where he lost his mother and little sister, and the world as he knew it ended. In 2001, 57 years after Elie Wiesel was driven from a cattle car onto the selection ramp at Birkenau, the death camp at Auschwitz, my journey as a Holocaust educator led me to those very gates of hell. As I walked along the same path where millions walked to their deaths, Elie Wiesel's words, which are printed on a wall at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, echoed in my heart and soul. For the dead and the living, we must bear witness. Tonight, you will touch history, for you will see and hear this distinguished Holocaust survivor. Elie Wiesel has said, "Whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness." It is my great honor to introduce my hero, Elie Wiesel.
Distinguished members of the faculty, students, friends. Let me first thank, of course, at least two members of your community. Rabbi Simcha, whose blessing touched me deeply. And what Daryl said, I never was compared to Elvis Presley. I have given many lectures. I've been introduced in many ways. But it's true, if I'm here, it's because really the invitation that they'll send, it was special, and I accepted it with great joy, and I'm glad I did. And Busya, more than you can know, I was moved by your playing. I was involved with the extraordinary, heroic chapter of Soviet Jewry, of Russian Jewry, since 1965. I have written about it. There wasn't a day for years, there wasn't a day that I didn't feel the need to try and help those Jews there. The fact that you are here playing means something to me, more than you know. Not only that, I used to play violin. As a child, as an adolescent, I played violin. And I remember the first time, because my father couldn't find a teacher, he did find a police officer, an officer of the gendarmerie who was a violinist. So twice a week I would come, sometimes even 3 times, I would come with a bottle of Romanian vodka, it's called Tsuika, and with my violin in the other arm. And he would begin to drink and I would begin to play. And when the bottle was empty, I left. So each time my father gave me a larger bottle. And I stopped playing. I didn't come back to violin only because of some of you read the story of the violin in Night. And since then, I can only listen. And I love violin, especially viola and cello. I love the music, and I love the way you played the cry. For this is what we can do, really, when we speak of so many lives that were lost. What can we do except cry? Sometimes we cry with words, other times with prayers. And I believe in prayer. The fact is that if you sisters, you prayed for so many days, I thought it was my doctor who helped me, but now I know who really. I was asked to speak to you about the moral society and about hope. I will try to do both. How does one build a moral society? We all studied the Bible, and the first family actually was the first moral society, and it didn't fare too well. You remember Adam and Eve and the serpent, all right, but let's not talk about it. So Adam and Eve had 2 children, Cain and Abel. Only 2 children. The only 2 adolescents in the world were Cain and Abel, 2 brothers. And yet one became the assassin and or the victim of the other. And for a long time I was asking myself, why does the history of the human family, the large human family, begin with such a morbid story? Is it to tell us that it's possible to be a brother and filled with hate toward the other brother? No. I believe it's simply to teach us that whoever kills his brother. And therefore, the fact of depriving the other person of his or her right to live his or her life is, of course, the cardinal sin. It is part of the 10 Commandments. Because life means more life. Life means to create more opportunities, more possibilities, to help history move forward to the soul, to the mind, or to the body. And therefore, when I say a child, any child, has the promise of the world in him or her, is always in line with what our scripture has said about life in general. You know, in our tradition, and Rabbi Simcha will tell you, in our tradition, we are told to respect a pregnant woman. It's not only because we have to be respectful to for her state, no. Because maybe she carries the Messiah in her womb. And then when we see a woman, or when we see a child, we cannot not be touched, moved, heartbroken if the child cries. And I belong to a generation that has seen children being killed. And whenever, therefore, I see a child today, I cannot not think of those children. 1.5 million Jewish children were killed. Many of them were killed just in human contact. The killers didn't even wait for the gas chambers. They just killed them with machine guns. Some of them were college graduates. Some of them had doctorates, PhDs in music, in the arts, in medicine, in philosophy, in religion. How was it possible? How was it possible? I was asked this question by the students I met and the educators I met here, and I'm so glad I did. How is it possible? How could a human being do that to another human being, especially to a child? And the question which I came to was a troubling question. Was it human then to be inhuman? What about humanity? What about the concept of humanity, the definition of humanity? What should a human being do in order to be excluded from humanity? And of course, we know the answer. The choice is always ours. The choice is always in our hands. The freedom given to us by the Creator of the universe is to choose between good and evil. But we must know the abyss separating one from the other. In a moral society, we know. In an immoral society, we almost follow the Orwellian logic, that everything is antinomian, that good is bad, bad is good, peace is war, war is peace. Everything is confused. Everything is disoriented. And therefore, what is the measure? The measure is the other. In a moral society, the other determines my humanity. It's not really my relationship to God. Forgive me, I speak in an atmosphere I know that most of you, if not all of you, believe in God's involvement in history, in human endeavors. But in my tradition, it is, it is the relationship between two human beings that determines the humanity of both. If I behave with compassion to my fellow man or woman, I come closer to God. If I betray my fellow man or woman, I move away from God. We are told in our Talmudic text, Amar Rabbi Akiva, one of the very greatest sages, one of the very greatest masters in the Talmud, who love thy fellow man or thy neighbor as you love as yourself, is a very important principle, if not the most principle in the Torah, in our law. It is the other. And in a moral society we know who is the other. Me. If I behave poorly to the other, what happens? I became another to myself. That the other is in me. And I believe, of course, that morally I must be who I am, and not to be a stranger to myself, and not to be the enemy of myself by being the enemy of the other. We can go on, of course, talking about philosophy, about theology, but the main thing is we talk about ethics. Ethics, you will know, and I know you have here an Institute for Ethics, and I applaud you for that. I was going around lobbying in universities in America to have ethics courses compulsory in the curriculum, especially in the professional schools. The doctor should know why he or she is a doctor. The engineer should know, the architect should know, and why? It is for the other. The doctor wouldn't be a doctor without his or her patient. The architect wouldn't be an architect without somebody to build a home for. It is the other. And in the immoral society, the other doesn't exist. The other is an abstraction. Therefore, the 20th century had two dictatorships, two totalitarian ideologies, two fanaticisms, a political fanaticism in Moscow and a racial fanaticism in Berlin. And both were catastrophes to humanity. Both, differently, of course. I don't compare. Hitler is Hitler, and whatever happened there is unique. But what communism has done is bad, was evil. Although it began again, the evil was dressed as good. The first constitution of the Soviet Union, believe me, is like a prophetic message. Peace among nations, brotherhood among men and women. And what do you mean? Everything was great, except nobody read it, and nobody followed it. And it became, therefore, in each case, it became a laboratory of deceit and falsehood, a laboratory of murder. No. In a moral society, men are not abstractions. Every human being is a spark of God's thought, of God's fire. Every human being has a messianic moment in his or her life. Is it possible? Is it possible in terrifying periods to attain that moment? And my belief is, of course, that life is not made of years, but of moments. And the end of my life, there will be a sum total of moments that will move the scale one way or another. Some good, some less good, some exalting, others depressing, but moments. And therefore it is the moment which marks the destiny of mankind. In a dictatorship, the individual moment doesn't count. It's an abstraction. And therefore they could take 100,000 people and kill them. Abstractions. In a moral society, one is not afraid to ask questions. When I was a child, I remember I would come home from school. My mother never asked me, did you have a good answer today? She would ask me, did you have a good question today? Never worry, never be afraid of questions. Of course, the questions must be posed with respect towards those from you whom you learned. Maimonides, the greatest of all philosophers in our tradition and in philosophy in general, said, not only does the student have the obligation to respect the teacher must respect the student, a kind of mutual respect. And I, as a teacher, believe me, I try to fulfill that commandment. There is nothing more beautiful than the relationship between a student and a teacher. The teacher who is there to give, and the student who is there to receive. And both give more than they know, and both receive more than they know. Naturally, there are certain subjects that cannot be transmitted. I know all of you are interested now, some of you have been as educators in what I consider, of course, the greatest tragedy in recorded history, that something had happened to my people first, but to other people as well, beyond them. And the difficulty is that the enemy had more imagination than the victim. The victim could never imagine the atrocities that the enemy had prepared. And that was why so many of the victims were trapped. And even when a messenger came and warned one ghetto or another, they couldn't imagine that what the messenger said was true. What do you do then? Is it therefore a way of saying, since we cannot transmit, why try? No. It is because we cannot transmit, we must try harder. Or you cannot come inside the gates, but we can bring you closer to the gates. What I have seen in my life, I have written many books, it's true. Believe me, we are now, Jews now are between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the high holidays, 10 days of penitence and soul searching. But I say it's true. Often I have the feeling I haven't even begun. There is so much that I should say. But how can you choose? The perpetrators? I cannot say I in their name. I cannot understand. I cannot grasp the meaning of all that. In the Talmud, there's a marvelous expression, Maiko Mashmalan. What does it mean? Each time that the sage says, what does it mean? And I remember when I came there, at night, what I try to describe in night, what went through my mind was, what does it mean, all that? That a parallel universe to the universe of creation, a parallel creation to creation, where everything was systematized, everything was clearly defined. Some people came to kill, others came to die. It created a society with its own princes and beggars, with its own philosophers, with its own miscreants. It was a country, an empire of death, with the cobblers and the tailors and the workers and the children who vanished in smoke. What does it all mean? And to this day, I don't know what it meant. All I do know that in retrospect, it simply meant that it could happen, since it happened. That it is possible for perversity to prevail when morality is gone. It's possible. And here, of course, I jump forward. My good friends, in 1945, when the war ended, I was naive, and I had some hopes. Combined with the despair which was ours, I had some hopes. I was convinced, and I would have sworn on what is sacred in our tradition. I would have sworn that at least the world will have learned certain lessons. No more wars, because we saw, I think, how many, 40 or 60 million people died in the Second World War. No more hatred, because we have learned what hatred bequests, what it begets, what it gives. Death. Hatred means death. No more anti-Semitism, because we know, we have learned that anti-Semitism leads to Auschwitz. I saw that anti-Semitism died with its victims in Auschwitz. Never would I have imagined that anti-Semitism would be alive and only the victims perish. I saw that never again will children starve. Never again will children die prematurely, unjustly, on all kinds of battlefields. That never again, I was convinced of that, will the world be seduced by fanaticism. And here we are. Now, of course, I speak to you as a son of the Jewish people. The only people of antiquity to have survived antiquity. When I say I am a Jew, believe me, I do not say it to exclude others. It's quite the opposite. It is the Jew in me that believes in opening the palm and say, we are together. I say, I can only be of help to my fellow men and women as a Jew, because I was born a Jew. I come from that tradition. My parents were Jewish. My grandparents were Jewish. I go back in family line to Rashi, one of the great commentators. But when I say that, believe me again, I say that the Catholic has exactly the same right to say as a Catholic, and the Protestant as a Protestant, and the Muslim as a Muslim, and the Buddhist as a Buddhist, and the atheist as an atheist. I can only be a Jew from inside my Jewishness. The universality I try to attain is within the radius of my Jewishness. But as such, I want it to be universal. And therefore, when I say, what does it mean? I know what it means to my people, but I want to know what it means to you. It means that it should not happen again to any people. And therefore, I became involved in human rights in my adult life. And what I said, I say again and again and again, that the most important commandment to me, at least to my century, is a commandment called, thou shalt not stand idly by. Thou shalt not stand idly by when a minority is being persecuted anywhere on the globe. Thou shalt not stand idly by when people die because nobody cares for them. Thou shalt not stand idly by when terror has become a dominant force on the world stage. Thou shalt not stand idly by when victims need a presence, when the prisoners of conscience are alone, when they are so solitary in their cell, when the AIDS patient is alone in despair in a hospital. You shall not be idly by, not stand idly by. And therefore I saw here people who came from Bosnia. I went to Bosnia because I couldn't understand. How didn't you learn anything? I remember I was going around then in the refugee camps, Macedonia and Albania, and I simply listened. I listened to the stories they told. I came to receive stories. And you know, always, not often, but always, a person began telling the story and burst out in tears, and not one person could complete the story. I felt maybe that's my role, my duty, my mission, to complete their story. At least that we can do, hoping that if we tell the story, it will help. Now, is this my hope? Yes. Of course, I believe in hope. I told the students today, and I believe it, you know, I belong to a tradition that has given the world a gift, Messianism. I am a student of religions. Messianism is a Jewish gift to history, that history goes forward, moves somewhere to salvation, to redemption. I believe in that. This hope. I remember asking myself, why does the Israeli anthem called Hatikva, hope? And it says at one point there, Ot lo avda tikvateinu, our hope has not yet disappeared. And I'm a good student. I try to go to the source. Why do we say has not vanished or has not disappeared? It comes from the book of Ezekiel. And I found there two expressions that haunted me. One of them is the shame of hunger. The prophet urged people to beware of the shame of hunger. And I asked, why should a hungry person feel ashamed? It's enough that the hungry person is hungry. And then I understood, oh no. The shame of hunger is when the person is hungry, I should feel shame. That is the shame of hunger. And the second one is when the prophets bemoans a situation in which maybe the elders in Israel would say, Avda tikvateinu, we lost our hope. They thought maybe the God of Israel has given up on Israel and chosen another people. And that would be, of course, the loss of hope. And I believe, no, it ain't so. We shall never give up hope. Why? Because hope is like peace, a gift that we give one another. And we had all the reasons in the world, my young friends especially. You are young, you inherited this century. It's not my century, it's yours. And if I teach and if I write and if I speak to you, it's because I tell you, you make this century into a better one. But it began poorly. Wars and more wars and terror and a new scourge, terrorism. You do something. It's your century. I can only be here to help, and I give you my help. And I say to you, therefore, look, my generation had all the reasons in the world to give up hope, give up faith in humankind, faith in civilization, faith in culture, faith in education. They were educated people, those who killed. And faith in general, because when you think of the victims, it breaks your heart. So how can you go on praying? You pray. The prayers of the victims were not received. Some of the victims died with the outcry, Shema Israel, hear, O Israel, God is our God, God is one. They were not received, they were not heard, they were not saved. And I'm telling you, we had all the reasons, but we decided not to invoke them. and say, yes, we suffered, all right, we suffered, but suffering does not confer any privilege. It's what you do with it that matters. If you invoke it to cause more suffering, you betray your own. But you may invoke it so as to prevent others from suffering. And that is true of hope. My fear is, when I speak of hope, I don't want my hope to be the other person's despair. And I must tell you, I thought about it with respect to my own people. I never lived in Israel, but I feel close to Israel, to the history of Israel, to the destiny of Israel, to the land of Israel. But I knew all the time. I knew of the plight, of the pain, of the anger of the Palestinians. And once, I remember 30 years ago already, in the 1970s, I wrote a letter to a Palestinian saying, learn from us how to build on ruins. We did not use violence. In 1945, believe me, we young people, if we had decided to become avengers, just avengers, who would have protested? But we didn't. If we decided to use violence to make money or to do whatever to get something, we could have gotten away with it. We paid our dues. But we didn't. And I said to the Palestinian, give up violence and I will become your greatest defender. And today, I say to them, give up terrorism. I would do whatever I can to help. I must tell you a short story. In last year and this year, King Abdullah of Jordan and I, through our foundations, his is a big one, mine is a small one, we organized 2 conferences which I convened for Nobel laureates. And the title was A World in Danger. And this year, we invited Prime Minister Olmert, who had just become Prime Minister, from Israel, and the President of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, to come. They didn't want to come together, but I arranged it, that I had one-on-one discussions in public with them, and then we brought them together for a breakfast, and everything was great. They hugged each other, they embraced each other. And believe me, it was a moment of promise. We already discussed joint committees for scientific cooperation and economic cooperation and political. Everything looked great. And then came the terrorist activities of Hezbollah and Hamas, and it's blocked everything. But we shall continue. Now, what will happen now? I do believe still. It will happen. That is my hope. My hope is that there will be 2 states, and they will live. They have to. The 30-year-old war ended because both sides, both camps were tired. And I think here too, they are tired. And so, it will come. It will come. Then comes the last. I could have lost my faith in God. I was asked by a student here about that. I could have lost my faith in God. I had good reasons. Believe me, I had good reasons. I had good arguments. But I never lost it, really. It was wounded. And I read to you something, because for me, God, my question to God was, tell me, Mr. God, you created man. Does it mean that man is your failure? If so, what can we do to redeem him? So a few years ago, I wrote an open letter to God. And I published it for Rosh Hashanah in the New York Times. And I'll read it to you because it's somehow I felt this evening is a special evening. Not only I hope for you, but for me too. And this is what I wrote. But then, after I finish this, I know there will be questions. I will try to answer the questions. If I don't know, I will say so. But I hope you know that I have to go back to New York, and immediately afterwards at 8:30, we must be out. This is what I wrote to God. Master of the universe, let's make up. It is time. How long can we go on being angry at one another? More than 50 years have passed since the nightmare was lifted. Many things, good and less good, have happened since to those who survived it. They learned to build on ruins. Family life was recreated. Children were born. Friendships struck. They learned to have faith in their surroundings, even in their fellow men and women. Gratitude has replaced bitterness in their hearts. No one is as capable of thankfulness as they are. Thankful to anyone willing to hear their tales and become their ally in the battle against apathy and forgetfulness. For them, every moment is grace. Oh, they do not forgive the killers and their accomplices, nor should you. Master of the universe, don't forgive the killers of children. But the survivors no longer look at the passerby with suspicion, nor do they see a dagger in every hand. They learn to renew their limited yet necessary trust in the other. Does this mean that the wounds in their souls have healed? They will never heal. As long as a spark of the flames of Auschwitz and Treblinka will glow in their memory, their joy and mine will be incomplete. What about my faith in you, Master of the universe? I never really lost it. You know that. Not even over there, during the darkest hours of my life and yours. Was it due to my extremely pious upbringing? I don't know why I kept on reciting my daily prayers and those one reserves for the Sabbath and for the holidays, but I did recite them, often with my father and at times with hundreds of inmates. Was it because they remained the link to the world of my childhood? But my faith was no longer pure. It was filled with anguish rather than fervor. In Auschwitz, on the days of awe, which are the days of judgment, my traditional prayers were directed to you as well as against you. What hurt me more, your absence or your silence? In my testimony, I have written harsh words about your role in our tragedy. I would not repeat them today, but I felt them then. I had to say what I felt. Why did you allow, if not enable, the killer? Day after day, night after night, to torment, to kill, to annihilate tens of thousands of Jewish children and their teachers and their parents and grandparents. Why were they abandoned? God of mercy, where was your mercy? God of compassion, where was your compassion? The evil murderers threw babies in flame-filled ditches alive, and you did nothing to make your will known and your law obeyed. These thoughts were in no way meant to diminish the guilt of the guilty who betrayed whatever is sacred and noble in the human being. Their established culpability is irrelevant to my problem with you, Master of the universe. In my childhood, I did not expect much from human beings, but I expected everything from you. To me, justice meant you. Goodness meant you. Love meant you. Where were you, God of kindness, in Auschwitz? What was going on in heaven at the celestial tribunal? Were your children, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were marked for humiliation, isolation, and death only because they were your children. They were your Jewish children. These questions have been haunting me for more than 5 decades. They emerged in some of my writings. Some were misinterpreted, others refuted. But you have defenders, you know. Answers, many theological answers were given to me, but I reject all answers when it comes to that period. Auschwitz must and will forever remain a question mark. It can be conceived neither with God nor without God. Actually, what your obstinate defenders, unafraid of their own fanaticism, seem to forget or ignore is that in our tradition, man is allowed to question you, even to oppose you, when it is for the sake of victimized people. From Abraham to Moses to Jeremiah in the Bible and in the Talmud and throughout Hasidic literature, one encounters the outcry against both human and divine injustice. Jeremiah in Lamentation says bluntly to God, quote, "You have killed without mercy, you have slaughtered without mercy." No, really, I would never say that. I say the killers killed and you were silent. Jeremiah says, you, God, have killed and slaughtered. And if he said it then, what should we say now? But then at one point I began wondering whether I was not unfair with you, Master of the Universe. After all, Auschwitz was not sent down by heaven. It was created, conceived, and built by human beings. It was meant to destroy not only us, but you as well. Why then ought we not think of your pain, Master of the Universe, watching your children do what they were doing to other children of yours? What was your suffering? Oh, these questions do not answer the previous ones again. I really believe there are no answers. The wounds remain open. And yet, as we now enter the high holidays, I said, preparing ourselves to pray for the year of peace and happiness for our people, but all people. Let's make up, Master of the Universe. Yes, let's make up. For the child in me, it is unbearable to be divorced from you so long. See, there is hope. For there is fate. But you know where fate is? In our hearts. And you know where hope is? In yours. Thank you.
We're very fortunate that Elie Wiesel is going to answer some questions that came from our audience, starting with, how does hatred spread in the world and what can we do about it?
I believed for years, and I'm trying to push it through an international law, to declare hatred an infectious disease. And I mean it. Just infectious. Why? Because it's contagious like an infectious disease is. And it grows. It goes from cell to cell, from limb to limb, from person to person, from community to community, unless it is stopped. And I believe it should become a kind of an emergency situation. If I could prevail upon the President of the United States, I would say have a conference on hatred as an infectious disease for 3 days and 3 nights in the White House. leave everything else, bring the best people, psychologists and doctors and educators and moralists and religious personalities, just to see what should be done immediately to stop the plague, the scourge of hatred. Can be done, but education, of course, is the basic need. But I have learned in my life, whatever the answer is to essential questions, education must be its major component. In certain parts, unfortunately, I know with the Israeli-Arab situation, I've seen it. Their textbooks are filled with hatred, filled. So I tried to speak to the Secretary General of the United Nations, offering him everything to make them change the textbooks. But he failed. But again, should there be peace, I'm convinced they will change the textbooks, at least in that zone. But hatred, what about hatred in general? What about hatred for America? We read the new report that came out in Washington from the National Intelligence Agency, which is the umbrella group, that the Iraqi war actually increased terrorism by creating an atmosphere of hatred in the world for the United States. And I deplore it. First, I'm against hatred. I'm absolutely against hatred. But I also deplore the fact that, we should find ways of explaining ourselves, of saying that we are a moral nation. We are a great power, yes. A power is not great because of its economy, nor because of its military might. A great power is great because of its moral principles. And I believe that we are such a nation. When I go to France occasionally, I go to the military cemeteries in Normandy. The bravery, the self-sacrifice of American young people, I cannot tell you, my heart is filled with melancholy, but also with pride. The youngsters, in the thousands, you have rows and rows of crosses and occasional stars of David. They came from far away in America to save a village or a city, to save it, their right to be free. We have done something, and we should be proud of it. And I think we should continue to celebrate morality.
Thank you. What is your reaction to the recent ordination of the first 3 rabbis in Germany since World War II?
I think it's good. I am not a rabbi. But I love rabbis. It's true. Because rabbis are teachers, and I love teachers. I was offered ordination, I must tell you, but I from my great teacher, my name is called Saul Lieberman of blessed memory. For 17 years we studied, and he taught and I studied. And then he wanted me, and I said, no, I'm not that. I want to be a teacher, a writer, but the rabbi, I have such a respect for the rabbinic, really, such a respect for the rabbinic condition that I said, it's not for me. I come to hear rabbis, but not to be a rabbi. The fact that they have now 3 rabbis there, I think it's good. That means that religiosity grows. No, I remember in the Soviet Union, it was an atheistic country, and I describe it, I came there for the high holidays. The synagogues were filled, thousands and thousands of youngsters. And I wondered, where did they learn about all that? It was forbidden to study anything religious. Organized religion was destroyed, but not religiosity. And that was true not only of Jews, of Christians also came immediately, the moment the Iron Curtain went up or down, they filled the churches. I think today religiosity grows because there is an anguish, there is an anxiety in us. We don't know where the world is going. And when there is anxiety, religiosity steps in, trying to bring, if not comfort, some kind of reason, some kind of hope to the human being.
Thank you. How can this generation create a world of peace?
by example, first of all. And by, look, our culture is a strange culture. We celebrated war. We glorified war. If we had celebrated peace as much as we glorified war, who is a hero? A hero is somebody who is a heroic man, who goes in the battlefield and fights. Peter never said, you called me a hero, it's very nice, but you are the only one. But usually you say hero, oh, he's a soldier. No, a learned person who is a teacher is a hero. A sage is a hero. A moral person who brings morality into society is a hero. It's a matter of education again. I think it's possible to educate peace. How many universities have peace studies? Do you have peace studies here at Viterbo? Very few. I urge you to have peace studies and to make it more appetizing, give them credits for it.
Thank you. The last question. How do you feel about the German government paying reparations to concentration camp survivors and the victims' families?
Oh, I'm for it. I never asked for it. That's not new. That began in 1953. I was a journalist then, and I covered the first conference. It was in Holland, and I saw how it developed. Look, there are survivors who are poor, who need simply sustenance, and I think it's right for them to expect some kind, not of compensation. You cannot compensate for what they went through, simply of help, just help. So they should have. At one point they offered me to be the chairman of the Swiss fund, because of the bankers there, they had a fund of $400 million, and they wanted me to be the chairman, and I was under pressure to accept it, but I know nothing about it. I don't even know how to keep a checkbook. So I said, so I said, and furthermore, finally I said no, because I said, how can I decide who should get more? How can I measure another person's suffering? Somebody who was 1 year in Treblinka and 3 years in the Warsaw Ghetto, I don't know. So I didn't accept it. But I understand it's important. If I had accepted it, I would surely have helped mainly to open up old age homes and give them medical help until the last day. These kind of things. But I'm not good at that.
Thank you. I don't think we can leave tonight without having you respond on what's going on in Darfur.
Well, Darfur is a tragedy and a crime. And it's a tragedy because every day people die. Again, men, women, and children are being tortured, women are being raped, children are being exploited, and there's almost a kind of slavery. And simply murder. And if the world, in the international community, does not interfere, really, it's a shame, literally shame, because we could stop it. If we are not strong enough, the world is not strong enough to stop, then something is wrong with the world and its leadership. One thing you should know, let's say 1939-45, here in America, many people say, and they're right, that we didn't know. It's true, because it was kept a secret and the press really didn't play it up. That we didn't know. The leaders knew. Now we know. The leaders knew. But the people didn't know. No excuse today. Now we know. Problem is that, the media. I remember during the Vietnam War, I remember the first time when they showed on television live broadcasts from the front, which means they showed literally soldiers killing or being killed. And I remember I stopped. They always showed the evening program during dinner. I stopped dinner. How can you eat if that happens? Two weeks later, people went on eating, which means numb. That the danger is, I understand. I spoke to media leaders. They said the danger is if we continue like that, day after day, people will get numb. Look, what do I say? I say the media should employ people with imagination and genius to be able to project the news each time to make it interesting. If they can create so many programs for entertainment and they invest billions of dollars in finding imaginative programs to appear, they can certainly devote and attribute another budget for that too, to invest your talent, but bring the information to people. The problem is, what is the process? Information should not stop with information. Information should be transformed into knowledge. It's not the same thing. Knowledge should be transformed into commitment. If that is done, the world would be a better world.
Thank you. And now,
Thank you, Professor Wiesel. In the preface to his book, Night, Elie Wiesel wrote of the tremendous responsibility of the survivor. He states, quote, "The witness has forced himself to testify for the youth of today, for the children who will be born tomorrow. He does not want his past to become their future." End of quote. Elie Wiesel, thank you for being that witness. And now it is my distinct honor and privilege on behalf of Viterbo University to present to you the Pope John XXIII Award for Distinguished Service. This award is the university's highest non-academic honor. Those honored have demonstrated outstanding contributions in such areas as peace and justice, education, philanthropy, business, and religious life. Past recipients have included Joseph Cardinal Bernardine, Norman Vincent Peale, Mideast hostage Reverend Lawrence Jenko, Notre Dame President Theodore Hesburgh, Parker Palmer, Sister Helen Prejean, outstanding community leaders of La Crosse, and distinguished leaders of Viterbo's founders and sponsors, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. The plaque is engraved with an inscription for Pope John's 1963 encyclical, Pacem in Terris. With profound respect for your courage and witness, and with deep appreciation for your testimony and presence, Viterbo University and its Board of Advisors presents to Elie Wiesel the Pope John XXIII Award for Distinguished Service. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this evening. Please join us for many more programs from the Ethics Institute in the months to come. Some of those are listed on your program. Travel safely and good night.